People first saw the hull floating through the valley on sled runners. That alone was enough to stop work across half the town. Men stepped out of barns. Women paused at frozen laundry lines. Children ran alongside the road, shouting questions into the wind. Because what Elias Granger dragged behind his horse team did not look like building material. It looked like the broken body of a ship. A massive schooner hull. Old oak planks curved black with age and salt. Its keel scarred from years on rough northern water. Half the ribs exposed where the upper structure had long ago rotted away. And somehow, Elias intended to turn it into a roof. Jonas Hale laughed hardest. Boat finally sank too far from the ocean, he shouted as Elias guided the enormous hull toward the edge of his property. The others laughed with him. Elias didn't answer. He just kept the horses moving carefully across the snow. The hull creaked as it slid over the runners. Even damaged, the oak remained massive. Dense. Heavy. Built in an era when ships survived storms by brute strength alone. That mattered. Because Elias wasn't interested in appearance. He was interested in shape. The previous winter had nearly broken him. His ordinary cabin roof collected snow faster than he could clear it. Wind slammed flat walls day and night, stealing warmth constantly through corners and seams. Worst of all, heat gathered uselessly near the ceiling while the lower rooms stayed cold enough to freeze water overnight. By spring, Elias had become obsessed with one question. Why fight winter with flat surfaces? Then summer brought the answer drifting along the lakeshore north of the valley. The wrecked schooner had washed ashore years earlier after storms destroyed it near the cliffs. Most people scavenged the easy lumber and left the hull behind to rot slowly beside the water. Elias studied it for hours. Curved shape, layered oak ribs, built to deflect wind instead of resisting it directly. And inside old ship hulls, warmth held surprisingly well. That memory stayed with him. By autumn, he bought the remains cheaply and spent nearly 2 months hauling the giant structure inland section by section. People thought he planned to salvage lumber. No one imagined the real idea until he raised the hull upside down across heavy stone walls near the frozen lakeshore. Then the laughter truly began. You're living under a boat. Hope winter doesn't sail you away. Maybe fish'll move in too. Elias ignored every word. Because once the hull settled into place, the idea worked even better than he expected. The curved oak roof formed a natural arch over the cabin interior. Snow slid partially off instead of crushing downward evenly like it did on ordinary roofs. Wind struck the rounded shape and split around it rather than slamming directly into flat walls. But the real advantage came inside. The curved ceiling trapped and circulated warmth downward naturally instead of allowing it to stagnate uselessly overhead. Heat rolled gently through the cabin like air inside an oven. That was what Elias wanted. Not hotter fires. Better movement. Better retention. The construction itself fascinated the valley almost despite their mockery. Elias built thick stone lower walls first, half sunk into the earth near the lake bank. Then he lowered the hull over the structure using ropes, rollers, and a timber frame taller than any barn nearby. The moment the hull settled into place upside down, people gathered just to stare. Because it looked strange. Not ugly exactly. Just impossible. A ship resting on land like some giant sea creature frozen mid-turn. One evening Jonas approached while Elias sealed insulation between the oak ribs. You actually planning to survive winter in there? Elias hammered another plank into place. That's the idea. Jonas ran one gloved hand along the hull exterior. The oak felt thick as fortress walls. Still looks ridiculous. Probably. Jonas smirked. You know what's funny? What? Part of me hopes it works. That surprised Elias enough to glance up. Jonas shrugged. Would make one hell of a story. Then he walked away laughing again. By October, the cabin stood complete. Outside, the upside-down schooner hull remained weathered and dark beneath its new chimney vent. Curved oak ribs arched beautifully beneath layers of sealant, insulation, and packed moss. Inside, warm lantern light reflected across polished wood salvaged directly from the ship itself. The interior felt unlike any cabin in the valley. Rounded, sheltered, almost alive. A compact stove sat near the center beside heavy stone thermal blocks that absorbed heat slowly through the night. Sleeping quarters lined the lower walls where warmth remained most stable. Nothing inside was wasted space. Every curve served a purpose. The first frost arrived early. Thin ice spread across the lake edges before sunrise. Cabins throughout the valley lit fires constantly against growing cold. Elias lit one modest fire inside the whole cabin at dusk. Warmth spread slowly at first, then evenly. The curved ceiling guided heat downward instead of trapping it overhead. Thick oak and insulation retained warmth far longer than ordinary timber roofs. By midnight, the cabin remained comfortable with surprisingly little wood burned. By morning, still warm. Elias smiled when he checked the thermometer near the stove. 59 degrees. Outside, 15 below. Good. Very good. A week later, Jonas visited pretending casual curiosity again. He stepped through the cabin door and stopped immediately. The warmth felt different. Not harsh. Not dry. Steady. Almost surrounding him evenly from every direction. Jonas looked upward at the massive curved oak ceiling overhead. "I'll admit," he muttered, "this feels less insane inside." Elias handed him coffee. "The roof moves the heat." Jonas frowned. "What?" Elias pointed upward. "The curve pushes warm air back down." Jonas stood quietly for a moment, feeling it himself. No freezing corners. No trapped heat near the ceiling. The cabin stayed balanced from floor to roof. How much wood? Less than last year already. That bothered Jonas. Because every man measured winter survival by woodpile size. And Elias kept needing less. Then the blizzard came. Not an ordinary storm. A true northern lake storm driven hard through the valley by mountain winds. Snow buried fences overnight. Flat cabin roofs groaned beneath weight. Wind hammered walls hard enough to shake shutters loose from hinges. Late one evening during the worst of it, pounding struck Elias's cabin door. He opened it against swirling snow. Jonas stood outside carrying his youngest son wrapped beneath a heavy coat. Snow coated both of them nearly white. "Our roof's bowing inward," Jonas shouted over the wind. "Can barely keep the fire alive." Then he looked past Elias into the warm, curved interior glowing softly beneath the massive schooner hull. At the steady heat. At the calm air. At the thick oak arch overhead deflecting the storm itself. And for the first time, Jonas Hale stopped laughing at the boat roof. Elias stepped aside immediately. "Get inside." Jonas ducked through the doorway carrying his son close against the wind. Snow swirled briefly into the cabin before Elias shut the heavy door again. Silence returned almost instantly. Not true silence. The storm still groaned faintly across the curved hull overhead. But inside, the air stayed calm. Warm. Still. Jonas's son slowly pulled the blanket from his face and blinked toward the glowing lantern light. "It's warm," he whispered. Elias pointed toward the stone blocks beside the stove. "Sit him there." Jonas obeyed without argument. That surprised him almost as much as the cabin itself. Because only weeks earlier he would have mocked every inch of this place again. Now all he could feel was relief. The stove burned low near the center of the room. Not roaring. Not desperate. Yet warmth filled the cabin from floor to ceiling evenly, without the freezing pockets common in ordinary homes. Jonas looked upward slowly. The old schooner ribs curved overhead like the inside of some giant wooden animal. Wind struck the hull outside with a muffled rushing sound, sliding across the arch instead of hammering directly against it. "You barely hear the storm," Jonas muttered. "The shape breaks the wind," Elias replied calmly. Jonas shook his head. "A boat. A good one." Another pounding struck the door. Then another. Elias opened it carefully. Mrs. Carter stumbled inside wrapped in quilts. Behind her came the Miller brothers, both coated in snow nearly to the shoulders. "South roof collapsed," one of them said breathlessly. "Couldn't keep the fire going." Elias nodded toward the far wall. "Stay near the stone blocks first." The cabin filled steadily after that. Families arrived in groups through the storm, driven by failing roofs, weak fires, and cabins bleeding heat faster than what could replace it. No one laughed anymore. Not at the hull. Not at the shape. Not at the man living beneath an upside-down ship. Because outside, winter punished flat roofs and exposed walls relentlessly. Inside the whole cabin, the storm lost. That was the difference people felt immediately. The curved oak roof deflected wind naturally. Snow slid from the rounded surface instead of piling dangerously deep overhead. Thick layered ship timber held warmth far longer than ordinary roofing. And the heat itself moved differently. Warm air rolled gently downward along the curved ceiling instead of collecting uselessly overhead. Even with more than a dozen people crowded inside, The cabin remained steady, balanced, controlled. Jonas sat near the stove watching his son finally fall asleep beside the warm stone blocks. "No drafts," he murmured quietly. Elias handed Mrs. Carter another blanket. "The hull seals tight." Jonas ran one hand along the inner oak planking beside him. "Smooth. Warm. Solid. This thing crossed oceans once." Elias nodded. "North water mostly." Jonas gave a tired laugh. "And now it's fighting blizzards." "Same job," Elias replied. That made several people smile for the first time in days. The storm continued through the night. Wind screamed across the lakeshore hard enough to shake weaker buildings throughout the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a roof collapsed with a sharp cracking boom swallowed quickly by snow. Inside the whole cabin, children slept. Lantern light flickered softly against old oak ribs. The stove burned steadily without needing constant feeding, and the curved ceiling kept returning warmth gently back into the room. Old Mrs. Carter looked upward thoughtfully. "Feels like the whole roof's holding heat for us." Elias nodded once. "In a way it is. Because the oak itself had become thermal mass. Decades of shipbuilding layered thick hardwood planks together stronger than most cabin roofs in the valley. Once warmed, the structure released heat slowly instead of losing it instantly to the storm outside. Most homes fought winter directly. This one redirected it. That realization settled quietly through the room as the storm raged on. By morning, the worst had finally passed. The wind weakened first. Then snowfall softened. Elias opened the cabin door carefully. Snowdrifts rose high along the lake shore, but the whole roof itself remained mostly clear where the curved shape had shed buildup naturally during the storm. The valley beyond looked battered. Several cabin roofs sagged badly beneath snow weight. Fences disappeared entirely. Smoke rose weakly from damaged chimneys. People stepped outside slowly from beneath the schooner hull and turned back toward the strange structure protecting them. The upside-down boat resting beside the frozen lake. Warm, solid, untouched. Jonas stood beside Elias staring upward at the curved oak arch. "I spent half the autumn calling this thing ridiculous." Elias folded his arms against the cold morning air. "You did." Jonas shook his head slowly. "And now it's the only roof in the valley I trust." Others heard that. No one disagreed. Because everyone inside during the storm knew it was true. The weeks afterward changed how people thought about building. Not immediately, but steadily. Men began studying roof angles more carefully. Curved sheds appeared first, then partially arched cabins. Windbreak designs improved across the valley. People stopped asking only how thick walls should be. They started asking how buildings moved heat, how they handled wind, how shape itself could become protection. And always, their eyes drifted back toward Elias Granger's cabin beside the frozen lake. The one hidden beneath the wrecked schooner hull. One evening near the first spring thaw, Jonas visited again, carrying a sack of coffee beans traded from another valley. He stood outside studying the hull while snowmelt dripped steadily from the curved oak sides. "You know," he said, "maybe the strangest part isn't that this worked." Elias leaned against the doorway. "What is?" Jonas smiled faintly. "That the ship finally found calmer water after wrecking." Elias looked back at the old schooner roof overhead. The weathered oak, the curved ribs, the shape that turned a storm into something survivable. Then he glanced toward the valley below where other curved roofs had already begun appearing among the cabins. "No," he said quietly. "It finally found its real purpose."